Hi, it's Fraser here, Deputy Editor of Spiked. Before we get into this week's episode of the Brendan O'Neill Show, I just wanted to let you know about a very exciting event that Spiked is hosting. On the 27th of February, Spiked will be celebrating our 25th birthday. And to mark the occasion, we'll be hosting a party in central London for all of the people who make our work possible. That's the Spiked team, various contributors, friends of Spiked, and crucially, our supporters. People like you who donate to us every month and allow us to keep doing what we do. If you're a Spike supporter, a member of our online donor community, you can get your early bird tickets to our event now. But there are only very limited spaces available, so if you want to join us, please do not delay. To find out more, you can go to the Supporters Hub on our website by logging in, or check your emails because you should have received an invite in your inbox. I hope to see you there. Now, on with the show.
Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Robby Soave. Robby, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you back on, and everyone in the world is talking about your country and your new leader, so I really want to get your thoughts on what's going on there. And as I was watching the events of the past few weeks, I thought to myself, Libertarians in America must be really happy. Like the guys, Robby Soave and the guys at Reason, they must be really happy with what's going on. We've got a new president who's issuing executive orders defending freedom of speech from social media overreach. We've got Mark Zuckerberg sacking his fact checkers, or most of them, essentially sacking his old censors. You've got the Doge movement led by Elon Musk, which is gutting some of the American state, the kind of bloated state. And there just seems to be a kind of anti-political correctness vibe going on in Trump's America. Is that how you read it? How excited are you, generally speaking, about what's been happening there?
Well, the answer to the question, are libertarians happy, is always no, because we're never happy. But no, you're right. You hit on a number of I would argue, positive developments in the political world. I do find myself in a very unusual and frankly uncomfortable position of being happy with a lot of the changes taking place in my government. I don't know that I've ever been in that position my entire life. It is not normal for me to be like listening to the things that are happening and thinking to myself, yeah, I'm pretty cool with that. That sounds good. So it is weird. I didn't quite know, because we went through 4 years of Trump, right? And I think the hair on fire liberals were wrong about a lot of it, because frankly, it wasn't that different, the first Trump administration, from what you would have seen from any other Republican or frankly any political figure of any party. It was a lot of continuity in policies I don't really like. So, I was lukewarm for Trump running again this time. So I'm like, well, he talks a good game on some stuff, wild in other ways, but probably we're just going to get standard, growth of government. And then he comes in and he puts Elon Musk in large parts of cutting waste. And you have the other tech titans, if not getting explicitly on board with Trump, getting on, becoming more favorable. And it's not about falling in line with a cult of personality. Like people should be free to criticize Trump. I don't agree with everything he does by any stretch of the imagination, but there really does seem to be a disempowering or a desire to disempower the people you're discussing. The censors, that whole movement seems to be falling by the wayside. Like we're all getting on the same team now of saying, you know what, that all went way too far, and there's too much government bureaucracy-driven law and around speech and other subjects, and that needs to come to an end.
Yeah. Well, let's dig down into some of those specific questions, especially in relation to liberty, which is an issue close to my heart and close to yours as well. Let's start by talking about the tech bros, the tech oligarchs, and they're moving towards Trump. I mean, it was very striking at the inauguration. He was surrounded by some of the world's best-known tech oligarchs. Lots of people, of course, including some of the liberals who are still very upset about the whole phenomenon of Trump. They're saying that, this is a government by billionaires for billionaires, and they're saying, here we have a new oligarchy taking over America. And I almost couldn't believe it when Joe Biden, as he was leaving office, said, we're heading towards dangerous oligarchical waters. And you had to kind of remind yourself that actually the tech oligarchy was on his side for a very long time. So talk to us a little bit about that shift that has taken place, because it does seem quite dramatic, because I remember having so many discussions over the past few years where it was just taken for granted amongst those of us who support freedom, and especially freedom of speech, that the Silicon Valley establishment was too often on the side of the Democrats, too often on the side of the coastal elites, and was too keen to clamp down on controversial speech. And now they do seem to have shifted quite dramatically to the other side of politics, and to the other side possibly of the liberty question. How dramatic do you think that shift is? How real do you think it is?
I think it's very dramatic and it's very real. And I know there are skeptics, there are cynics, even from people in my own coalition or people on the right who are like, well, we can't just trust Zuckerberg after what he did to all of our companies, falling in line with all the censorship. And look, I hear that, trust but verify, fine. But Zuckerberg, and he's a stand-in for the rest of them, their explanation for their behavior actually does make a lot of sense if you listen to it. He's basically said, look, I was getting screamed at by everyone, right and left. Both Democrats and Republicans wanted to haul me before Congress multiple times to accuse me of every sin on earth, including the end of democracy and the abuse of children. And look, I didn't want my company destroyed. So Joe Biden threatened me. He said Facebook was killing people unless I took down more dissenting content. So we tried to do that. Our moderators were uncomfortable with a lot of what they told us to do, and we fought back, but it just became so overwhelming and they were going to destroy my company. So we gave in, and we now regret doing that because it turns out no amount of compliance was going to be good enough for the progressive, deep state, Elizabeth Warren type people. And so you know what? Now we say to hell with it, and we're not doing that anymore. That you don't have to like that all that occurred, but that seems to be what happened. These CEOs were, reasonably acting to protect their shareholder interests and grow their companies, and they thought going along with Democrats to some degree was in their best interest, and they now realize that's wrong. Elizabeth Warren sent a letter to Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, who gave, like $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund, and she's like, this is corrupt and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And he just responded, well, nobody did this to me when I gave to Democrats. So I think the tech CEOs have learned an important lesson. Also, we're more cognizant now of the threat, frankly, that China represents. China is innovating in the AI space. I don't want to have World War III military conflict with China, but I do want our economy to beat theirs. And I think, most people in the free and developed Western world want that as well. And so our regulations should be not unfairly favorable to tech. I don't want subsidies for tech. I don't want that kind of thing. But I want us to continue to have free economies where these companies can flourish. Those companies want that too, and they see Trump correctly, in my view, as the vehicle for that. And the downstream effects are going to be very, very, very positive for liberty and for free expression and for getting rid of just those awful fact-checking organizations that wouldn't let you talk about lab leak, wouldn't let you say anything about Hunter Biden's laptop. But by and large, these forces were not internal to the company. Like if you read the emails between the moderators at Facebook and Twitter and the government agents, they do push back. That was what most surprised me about the Twitter files and that stuff. You can find the moderators saying, we're really uncomfortable. We don't think we should do this. But eventually the government got its way. So now saying we're going to tell all those people to take a hike, we would never listen to them again, that is huge. And it actually was the company's instincts. They went against it for a while. I think now we're back in business.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you specifically about that problem that existed in the United States, because it was, as you say, the Twitter files and other scandals did confirm that some people in these social media companies were pushing back against the Biden administration's demand that they remove certain material or censor certain material. But it was so extraordinary to me as an outsider watching this happen in the United States, the home of the First Amendment, where there is supposed to be no government intervention in people's right to express themselves. And yet here we had a situation where government was putting pressure on social media companies to restrict people from expressing certain views. How unconstitutional do you think that was? Or is there a get-out clause in the First Amendment that allows government to censor its citizens so long as it outsources that censorship to social media companies or private companies? Wasn't that just a real crisis of the Constitution that kind of underhand censorship could take place?
So in my personal opinion, I certainly think it was unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court took up the issue, and it really for a standing reason, it's a bit technical, did not affirmatively state that the government's actions there violated the First Amendment. Certainly, a number of the justices were uncomfortable with what the government had been doing. But, a lot of these communications between government officials and the company, took the phrase of, you ought to take down this piece of content. And if you don't, we might be having another hearing about your Section 230 liability protection next month, hint, hint. But, do whatever you want. We can't make you. And unfortunately, I think under maybe if a different case was brought, the Supreme Court might look at it more closely and say, oh, yeah, that was clearly unconstitutional. But for now, no, it doesn't. It was not ruled to directly be unallowed by the First Amendment, which means that who runs the government does matter for this issue. Donald Trump issued an executive order that I don't agree with all of his executive orders. I think this one, however, was great, instructing federal officials, federal employees, they may not communicate with social media platforms in that way, that it was totally inappropriate. Some levels of communication between government officials and social media companies is fine. I think most of us think that, if the FBI is aware of like terrorist activity or gang activity on Facebook, it can tell them like, hey, this is a terrorist group organizing, do with that what you will. But that the kinds of viewpoint based, hey, we think this article saying that maybe children don't absolutely need to get vaccinated for COVID. We want you to take that down because that could encourage vaccine hesitancy among other groups. That was the kind of editorial judgment the CDC was making on Facebook's behalf. It was completely wrong. And I am very glad to hear, even if it's not unconstitutional, for Facebook to say, you know what, we're not listening to that anymore. That is a big, big step.
Yeah. So on that executive order that you're mentioning, which was one of Trump's very good ones, like you, I agree with some of them and disagree with others. But this one, restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship, there was a really important point in there, which is that it makes the point that under the guise of combating misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, the federal government infringed on the constitutionally protected speech rights of American citizens. And that is so true. That really rang true with me. I know it will have rang true with you as well, because one of the slipperiest ways and one of the most effective ways in which speech has been curtailed over the past few years, not only in the US, but around Europe as well, is through presenting certain ideas or certain forms of expression as misinformation, disinformation, and thus unallowable. You can't have that in the public sphere. It really, tackling misinformation, or what was referred to misinformation, did become a shield, didn't it, for which people could enact what it was essentially a political form of censorship.
Absolutely. I like to say that misinformation is the new hate speech. Hate speech used to be the category of speech that that people who want to do censorship would say, well, of course we're not in favor of censorship. We're in favor of free speech. We're just trying to disallow hate speech. That's different. And you and I and anyone else who has even a passing familiarity with the First Amendment knows that's not true. Hate speech is precisely the category of speech that is protected by the First Amendment, because you would get into this obvious problem of, well, criticism of Christianity or Islam can be hateful to people who practice those, but is obviously protected by our First Amendment. It's the most obvious kind of speech that is protected. And organizations like the ACLU used to do great work protecting that category of speech. It is now misinformation, where we're here time and time again. A red flag goes off for me every time I hear someone even use the word misinformation now, because what I often find is first of all, that it's just a made up category. I mean, this used to refer to, I believe this term effectively comes from military strategies, like when we try to make the Nazis think we're landing on this beach when we're actually landing on this beach. This concept is now being applied to op-eds that people disagree with. And it would be one thing if the so-called misinformation, disinformation experts were like super genius people who had a above average ability to spot bullshit, for lack of a better word, which is never the case. Almost every person who calls themselves a disinfo researcher or disinfo expert has gotten one of those major stories wrong. COVID lab leak, Hunter Biden laptop, how many disinfo researcher, expert people shared the Politico story, the former heads of national intelligence saying that Hunter Biden's laptop looks like Russian disinfo. Like that's that category of people who got things wrong. That doesn't mean they're wrong about everything, or that doesn't mean, people who disagree with them are right about everything. They're right sometimes, we're right sometimes. That's just the normal process of dialogue. But they're asserting they have enough a good enough, sorry to use it again, bullshit meter to tell that what's truth and what's lies, and that's just never the case with these people. So it's really a sham industry that unfortunately gets not only a lot of funding but a lot of government funding. Our own State Department it's funding you guys. It's funded one of those disinfo tracking groups is like a British nonprofit funded by the State Department to tell American social media companies that they shouldn't run dissenting content. It's horrible.
This episode of The Brendan O'Neill Show is sponsored by Proton Mail. There is a lot of fear-mongering these days about how big tech is always out to get us, how all our private data is constantly at risk of being stolen and sold. And it's actually true that we could all be a bit more careful when it comes to protecting our privacy online. But how do we actually do that? Well, you could do what I've done and start using Proton Mail, the world's largest secure email service. Proton Mail's number one priority is keeping my data safe. Its end-to-end encryption means that the only people who can read my emails and open my attachments are the people I'm actually sending them to. Even Proton itself can't access any of that. This is great if you're sending sensitive or confidential messages, but it's also worth it if, like me, you just want some peace of mind. If the worst happens and there's some kind of data breach, you can be sure that none of your personal info will be leaked. When I first heard about Proton Mail, I thought it would be a massive pain to set up and transfer all my emails over from my regular service, but it's actually really easy. Proton Mail's migration tool means that you move all your emails, calendars, and contacts to Proton with just a few clicks. And with Proton's automatic forwarding tool, you can easily forward all your incoming emails to your encrypted Proton inbox. So if you're tired of worrying about email security, then protect your messages today with Proton Mail's end-to-end encryption. Go to proton.me/Brendan O'Neill or click the link in the description to sign up now for a 38% discount. That's proton.me/Brendan O'Neill for a 38% discount. It's horrible and it's crazy, and the sooner all this stuff falls down, the better, I think. On the disinformation question, it's so interesting because, of course, the usual suspects, kind of liberal think tanks, some journalists, including here in Britain, they've responded to Trump's executive order on freedom of speech and also to Mark Zuckerberg's sacking of his fact checkers. They've responded to that with great alarm, and they seem to think that now the floodgates of insanity will open. Everyone is going to spout complete nonsense on the internet like they weren't doing that already. And the world is going to go to hell in a handcart. They really do have this vision as the fact checkers having been the guardians of sane society from the madness of the crowd or the lunacy of the disinformation promoters. What have you made of that response? Do you think there's some recognition on their part of the cultural power that was given to them through the disinformation narrative, because it allowed them to pose as the arbiters of what was acceptable discussion in public life, and they feel that power kind of ebbing away now, don't they?
Yeah, and I think there's been almost no self-reflection on their part for why that power is being taken away. I mean, the Facebook fact checkers, so Facebook system was, we have a approved number of like a dozen organizations that do fact checking on our feed, and they flag stuff as wrong or no good, and then we take moderation action. So it's up to them. And those groups, particularly on COVID topics and on environmental climate topics, these are just activist groups that got things wrong all the time. I had articles that I'd written for Reason Magazine. Once I vividly remember this one being flagged. My article was not even, it was not original to me. I was summarizing an Atlantic article that was arguing that some recent study on the efficacy of mask mandates in schools showed that schools that had mask mandates and didn't have mask mandates had no difference in COVID outcomes. Not original to me. This was someone's research summarized by The Atlantic. I was summarizing The Atlantic's version of it. And it got censored on Facebook by one of these fact-checking organizations that said, well, you made the claim that masks don't work, and that's misinformation. I said, well, actually, you're spreading misinformation because you're saying that I said masks don't work, a claim that does not appear anywhere in this article. The claim is that schools that had mask mandates fared no differently than schools that didn't have them. That's a completely different claim. So you're introducing misinformation into this topic. And because I'm not no one, I have I've written a book about Facebook. I can really contact the levers of power at the company. I was able to get that reversed in a day. But somebody who's just your uncle posting on Facebook, they don't have that level of input. So that's the kind of mistake. And this happened to people all the time. Like, they were making mistakes. And look, it's fine to make a mistake, but we all make mistakes. But you can't be the referee if you're just as prone to making mistakes as everyone else. And I would add that the kind of fact-checking system that X uses, that Twitter uses, which was not innovated actually by Elon Musk. The company was rolling it out before he bought it. The community notes feature works pretty well and follows the kind of Wikipedia style where you open it. It's democratic. You open it to the community and you allow collaborative feedback, and it doesn't always work out correctly, but it tends to work out pretty well. It actually, frankly, does work out for Wikipedia. It doesn't mean everything you read on Wikipedia is right at all times, but usually egregiously false things get edited out. That seems to happen with the community notes function on X pretty well too. So that's just a better way of doing that. And Zuckerberg agrees and is moving the platform in that direction. It's so much better than deputizing a handful of activist organizations to tip the scales on controversial political subjects. Like, that was obviously doomed to failure.
Yeah, absolutely. Always trust the swarm of ordinary people rather than these kind of appointed so-called expert fact checkers. I think that's a good lesson in life. I agree with you that this development at Meta under Mark Zuckerberg is a very positive one. I don't feel particularly cynical towards Mark Zuckerberg. I know lots of people do, and they're saying, well, he stabbed us in the back before on certain issues, he'll do it again. I don't really share that view, but I did want to ask you about whether we still need to be vigilant in relation to all of this, because for two reasons. Firstly, because the algorithms on Facebook and Instagram, which are the two big platforms owned by Meta, I mean, they are so vast and creaking and bureaucratic. I mean, I'm not on X and I'm not on Facebook, but I do use Instagram. And the number of times posts of mine have been taken down, or I've been banned from going live for 3 months or whatever, simply because the algorithm has misread something that I've posted and assumed that it's hate speech when it clearly wasn't. I mean, all of those things, I guess, will take some time to dismantle fully. And further to that, if they could engage in a system of censorship for the past 10 years, which many of these sites did, I guess that at some point in the future, maybe with a change of government or the arrival of a more tyrannical president, I guess the wind could change again and they might go back to censoring their users. So vigilance is still required, isn't it? And the cultural defense of freedom of speech is still important.
It is, absolutely. I agree with all that. And we always have to remember that at the end of the day, these are businesses they have to try to make money. The CEO has to do what he thinks is in the best interest of maximizing the shareholder value, the revenue, right? That kind of, I mean, I'm a journalist. I don't understand the business world, but that's what has to be done, right? So they're going to do what they think is in the long-term best interest of the company. Expecting them to do otherwise for any great length of time, you're always going to be not on solid ground. So then the question becomes, and what they're selling, right, is a curated user experience to to place more correctly correlated advertisements. That's in general their business model. It's not, I mean, X is, experimenting with a subscription model, but Instagram doesn't. Well, you can pay for the subscription model, but I think the main revenue point is advertising. So they will always be doing some level of moderating, some level of tweaking the algorithm to show you, the user, more content that you want to engage with. Now, something has clearly gone wrong on the Facebook main site. You are lucky not to be on Facebook. Facebook, by which I mean the actual social media platform, is completely broken today. And there is widespread recognition from Zuckerberg that it is totally broken. If you scroll Facebook, you won't even see. It used to be the debate between seeing news topics and seeing like posts from friends and family. Now you will mostly just see this kind of vaguely AI curated, like pop culture listicle type things that are not even that are often, again, I don't like to use the misinformation, but they're just like they're not even real. If that makes any sense, that's what Facebook is now. It is such a miserable misuse of what was once a really robust platform for news. Now, Zuckerberg has identified that and is working to fix it. So there's no way this is revenue maximizing. It's so broken and bad. And they pivoted toward it, again, because they got yelled at by the regulators. We forget, but from the 2016 to 2019, there was this anti-Zuckerberg fever pitch from progressives saying that, he allowed too much Russian influenced information on the platform, and that's how we got Trump. And they really threatened him. So then he said, okay, no more news on the platform. And now it's totally broken. So I hope they undo that. But big picture, we will always have to be vigilant because these companies will seek profits. And that will not always align with free expression, free inquiry, having a totally free and open platform. However, I think enough people, enough of these users of these sites do want that kind of experience, or at least they want a greater ability to curate the experience you get on the platforms. I think curation is fine. I think trying to say, well, maybe I want to see political news, you want to see less of it. You like to see a wide variety of kinds of content. You don't. Put those tools in users' hands. I think that's a good idea. But I think the companies are going to broadly discover that being a little bit lighter on the moderation, less panicked about, oh no, you read something controversial, will actually be healthy for the bottom line. That won't always be true in every case, but I think they're figuring that out.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the issue of polarization as well, because that's been one of the key justifications for curbing certain forms of speech online, and especially the expression of passionate views or controversial views or unwoke views, or however we want to refer to them. The idea has been that we need to really curb this stuff and control it and tame it in order to avoid the polarization that might afflict society otherwise. You made a really good point in one of your recent pieces over at Reason, where you said actually internal division and even polarization are the blessings of liberty, i.e. that's what makes a free society, the fact that there are often tensions and tense discussions and people falling out and having arguments and so on. Explain a little bit what you mean by that, because polarization, like misinformation, has become one of those kind of evil words, one of those bogey words that we're all supposed to feel terrified of, and keeping it at bay is seen as the most important thing to do. But that's not necessarily true, is it?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is we're polarized because we very vehemently, vigorously disagree on what the policies of our government should be, and we're a pretty evenly split nation between the two camps, with a small number of swing or undecided voters, or voters who could go either way, that we're fighting over. I mean, that's just reality. We disagree very strongly. Now, I think it is beneficial for our disagreements to be, even our very strident political disagreements, to be civil. We are sharing the same country. So if this is, I don't want to curb polarizing stuff as much as curb, I guess, acting out on extremism, or being so triggered by the news you go crazy, like that kind of because there is a mania that can take hold if you're just like doom scrolling social media at all times. That starts to overlap with some of the even non-political concerns about harms from overusing social media. I think some of those are exaggerated, and I don't like a lot of the solutions on the table. But we can all be healthier mentally, psychologically, by logging off sometimes. So, and we should get along with our neighbors and find ways to serve each other productively. In an economy, you should be able to be friends with and trade with people you don't agree with politically. I think all of that is good, but that's a little different than saying we should be less polarized. Like, we're polarized because I really, really think the priorities of the Democratic Party are very bad for America's future. Like I just do. I don't want them to succeed. I don't agree with everything Trump is doing, particularly on immigration, one of his signature issues. But I don't agree with every single thing Elon Musk wants to do. And I'm happy to remain vigilant about ways he could use his new power to actually just like personally enrich his companies, which are a lot of the government contractors. But on the other hand, he shares my ideological point of view more than basically anyone else who has been this proximate to power ever. And I totally agree with the idea of shrinking, if not killing outright, so many of these ruinous government agencies that are funding stuff all over the world that doesn't even serve America's issues, and that Congress has been totally unwilling to grab. Congress doesn't want to do its job whatsoever, never has, and so it's left to the executive and whoever he relies on. And so I'm glad that these things are happening, and progressive Democrats are furious about it. And how else is it going to be? Then, in 4 years, we'll debate whether it was good or not. And if they win, then they're going to enact their vision, and I'll be crying about it the whole time. And then it'll go the other. Like, that's just the reality. That's just how things are going to be because we disagree. Now, if the best thing to do, in my view, would be to devolve choices to the more local level. Say, you live your life how you want, I'll live it how I want. What's good for you in California is maybe not so good for me here, to the extent we can do that. But it is a big, influential, important country where a lot of decisions for everyone get made at the federal level. That was never my choice, but it's kind of just the boat we're in. So I don't know that tackling polarization is going to be the way. It seems kind of kumbaya. I mean, like, we fundamentally disagree. We're going to have it out. That's how it's going to be.
Yeah, that is how it's going to be, and how it should be as well. You mentioned there Elon Musk, and I did want to ask you about Elon Musk and what he's been charged with doing for this new administration. So let's talk about the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE as it's referred to, which, listening to some liberal voices, you'd think it was the worst thing ever invented, and libertarians, I know, are a bit more fond of it because it is going to tackle the bloated American state, and it is unquestionable that there are parts of the American state that are just out of control. So I want to ask you what you think about DOGE and what it plans to do. And I guess we should start probably with US aid, because that's what's in the headlines at the moment. It seems like it's going to be thrown in the wood chipper. It's game over. I've read some accounts that say that USAID's budget was 40 billion. Others say it was 50 billion. It gives money to all sorts of crazy things around the world, and probably to some good things as well. But I want to ask you where you stand on that part of the government in particular, because I have read some conflicting accounts from, I guess, what you might refer to as people on the right. So some people on the right are saying, look, we really need to trim the bureaucratic state. It's gone crazy. It's given our money away to stupid causes. Other people on the right are saying, look, we can't throw soft power out completely. America does still have a role in trying to shape world affairs to the benefit of America as much as that is possible. Where do you come down on that discussion? Do you think this thing can be entirely scrapped, or does there need to be a bit of care when we're doing things like this?
I mean, I guess I can't say it should be entirely scrapped, but because if people want to make cases for certain things that are being funded under it, fine. But I would say it can be substantially scrapped. The reason DOGE has started with this fight is because giving foreign payments, giving money to other countries or humanitarian causes in other countries is so profoundly unpopular with Americans, regardless of political affiliation. Every American says, please spend less on foreign aid. And then you hear, oh, well, foreign aid is not a big part of the budget. I always get so annoyed when I hear that excuse. Look, we spend tons of money. No one thing is like the only thing we spend money on. You can always get yourself out there and say, well, this is only a couple $1 million and this is only a couple. We'll cut nothing if that is the standard. I mean, then you would get to a place where the only thing you can cut is like entitlements, Medicare, which nobody does want to cut, even though it is the most, or one of the most largest categories of the budget. For me, USAID, I've heard it both ways, USAID and USAID. The conversation begins and ends with they were also funding reckless, dangerous scientific research in Wuhan, China. I thought that was all under NIAID, under the National Institutes of Health, but actually they funded it too. Yeah, so that's the end of the conversation for me. I don't want to do that anymore. This was done through EcoHealth Alliance, this grant receiving organization that has been the government, the National Institutes of Health have said we will no longer work with them because they tried to mislead us on how this money was going to be used. So clearly we need to do an auditing, an accounting. If this organization was also giving money for the scientific facility that quite possibly, plausibly caused the COVID pandemic. That to me says, okay, I would like a total shutdown on government funding for suspicious foreign entities until we know what's going on. I would say that Elon Musk has been clear that he's just going through it. It's still on Donald Trump to decide what's going to be funded and what's not going to be funded. And hopefully Congress, I do think legal problems could arise from some of this stuff eventually because, okay, Congress allocated funding for these things. Can the president just say, well, I don't actually want to do that? That's a closely litigated issue in constitutional jurisprudence. But the way to just make it extra secure is for Congress, which has Republican control right now, to start actually putting into force of law some of these things Trump and Elon want to do. So I would call on, this is an unusual position for me, actually wanting Congress to do something. Usually I'm happy to have them do nothing, but they actually need to write into law some of these changes to funding, or else they might not hold up in court, frankly. I do think the constitutional challenge to some of these things could be significant if Congress does not co-sign the will of Trump, which I believe reflects the will of the American people here. But look, it has to be done properly. So get on it, people.
Hi, it's Lauren Smith here, the producer of The Brendan O'Neill Show. I just want to let you all know that Spike's internship program is now open for applications. We're looking for an aspiring journalist to join our team on a 6-month, paid, full-time placement. You'd be working with us at the Spiked office in London, helping us with all our output, including articles, blogs, videos, and podcasts like this one. You don't need any prior experience to apply, but if you have worked in journalism before, or you know your way around video, audio, and social media management, then do make this clear in your application. Above all, we're looking for someone who has a passion for our pro-freedom, pro-human politics, someone who's hardworking, dedicated, and willing to learn on the job, and someone who's got a good eye for a story and a flair for journalism. Everything else you can learn on the job. I started at Spiked as an intern, so I can highly recommend applying for this. It's an amazing experience, and you get to earn while doing something you love. There really is nowhere better to kickstart your career in journalism. To find out more and to apply, go to spiked-online.com/interns. That's spiked-online.com/interns. You have until Sunday, the 23rd of February to apply. Good luck.
In relation to government efficiency, I did want to ask you if you think there's the potential for conflict on this question in particular between, I guess, the MAGA working class base and then these new movers and shakers around Trump, particularly Elon Musk, but these people who are kind of swarming in and saying, get rid of that, get rid of this, chop it all down. I completely agree with you that something like foreign aid is very unpopular in the US. Foreign aid in the UK is unpopular as well. And there will be lots of forms of government spending in America that are unpopular and people will see as wasteful. But I guess there are other sections of society in the US, particularly amongst the working classes, who recognize that a state is necessary for when people fall on hard times or when they need some form of assistance or in order to keep society chugging along, I guess. And you will know better than anyone the caricature of libertarians, which we know is not true, which is that they all just want to smoke weed all day and not wear seatbelts and never be told to do anything by anyone in a position of power. Now, that might not be true, but I do wonder, do you think there's a potential for conflict between some of the views amongst the working class voters who took a punt on Trump again, and the views of some of those who'll be running Doge and maybe dismantling things that people might actually have time for and like?
I agree with you. There are real ideological differences within the coalition between the two factions you're describing. I don't think those differences are going to quite matter when it comes down to spending on people who actually need welfare. I can't speak for all libertarians or anything, but I'm pretty uninterested in starting with that. There's a lot of other wasteful government spending I want to go after. I obviously think American tax dollars being spent to make sure the least fortunate don't get utterly ruined that's a very sympathetic thing to do, and there's more public support for it. And that's not the top of the chopping block by any stretch of the imagination. I don't really think that's a difference between these two factions, but there are definitely differences, particularly on immigration. So let's define these factions. One of the factions is the more working class, MAGA, some people call it national conservative, people who are a little bit more skeptical of markets, a little bit more favorable to pro-labor regulation, to antitrust, to making sure companies don't get too big and exploitative. Steve Bannon, the architect of Trump's initial victory, is a big figure on this side. And then on the other faction is more my people, the kind of libertarian tech, very pro-market, more for immigration because that's what the tech sector wants to really maximize their business vision. Much more market trusting, much more down the line against regulation. Now, there are a lot of areas of agreement. We're not really fighting on foreign policy. We kind of all agree that we want a more a less neoconservative, less interventionist foreign policy that Trump is usually, but not always, seemingly on board with. But we're going to fight over regulation, over antitrust, over immigration, and Trump, frankly, has been kind of taking the libertarian tech right side of things more than I necessarily would have expected, which shows how influential Elon. I mean, liberal people are correct. Elon Musk has a tremendous amount of influence over the government. It is staggering and unprecedented. It's not something I would have predicted. Had I predicted it, I would have been more excited about Trump running for a second term. To be perfectly honest, I did not think this would happen, but it has. And so now Trump is not always going to side with my faction, I'm sure. But there are some people on the MAGA right. Steve Bannon has called for Elon Musk to be thrown out of the coalition because they feel like they're not getting the absolute working class first policies they want. A lot of this has to do with industrial policy. And I'm just skeptical. I have this argument with the MAGA people all the time. I'm just skeptical that at the end of the day, we can do manufacturing again in the US or bring back all those factory jobs. I think the labor and environmental regulation and everything else makes that so difficult. And it's a little bit of a pipe dream that they have. Now, if it can be done, great. Or if we can find other trading partners, that are not threatening us, like China, to do it there and have trade with them, that's great too. So we can talk through. Tariffs is another big category here, but Trump's mostly using tariffs as a foreign policy tool to get leverage, whereas the MAGA coalition wants to use them in order to make it so that industries can develop here. And I don't really, again, my faction doesn't think that's a good idea. That's different than what Trump's doing, though. He's saying, I'm going to tariff you unless you give me some other policy I want, which is kind of different.
Yeah. I was wondering recently about what you think the knock-on effect of all this might be on campuses, because campus craziness is something that you've been writing about and speaking about for quite some time, and you and I have shared a platform discussing this issue, and it's a fun issue and a scary issue at the same time. Listeners will be familiar with all the cancel culture and cultural appropriation panics and all the other nonsense that took a hold on Anglo-American campuses over the past decade and more, in fact. What do you think will be the consequence there? I guess it could go two ways. Either some of these campuses will double down and become more like that as a way of distinguishing themselves from this new Trump era, or they might have to fall into line. I thought it was interesting that the Trump administration has opened anti-Semitism inquiries into 5 universities in the US, including Columbia and Berkeley, looking at some of the, I think, quite undeniable explosions of anti-Semitic feeling on some of those campuses. What do you think? How do you think this will play out in the world of the campus now that America does seem to be changing in quite a palpable way?
Yeah, it's very interesting because when Trump won in 2016, there was an explosion of progressive activism, not on college campuses, but not just on college campuses. And there was so much activity, and there was so much that was birthed by that I thought that was bad for individual liberty. Of course, these trends had been percolating before that. This time, it's a lot quieter so far. There has not been mobilization in the streets. Not very much of it on campuses. I mean, I should say there's, I think, a minor protest happening in DC right now, but it's very minor. The left is much more broken as a movement today than it was 8 years ago or even 4 years ago. The left is very fractured. That's my analysis. It could be wrong, but from my debate show Rising, I spent a lot of time debating people on the left, and I've learned a lot more about their movement and how they organize and who they listen to. COVID really broke the left in a big way, as far as I can tell. You've had the Bernie Sanders star is kind of just, he's been around and he's getting older, and he's kind of going to exit the scene soon. And there's not another big leftist leader to galvanize young progressive people. Also, young people are also just turning to the right. The rebellion against this is not original idea to me. I read this on a Substack the other day, but if you go back to like 2005, you're a young person. What are you rebelling against? You're rebelling against hegemonic Bushism. You're rebelling against freedom fries. You're rebelling against the Patriot Act. You're rebelling against reflexive opposition to gay marriage. So you're for liberalism to kind of stick it to your parents' generation. Now your parents' generation is as a centrist or center left liberal kind of rule following elite that believes in the experts and believes in the systems. And so now to rebel against that puts you more likely to be in the MAGA camp. So there's just an energy among young people that's not actually with the left, it's with the right. Now that's not everybody, of course. We could see another explosion on campuses of what we saw after the Hamas attack on Israel, which was just profoundly disturbing to me, and was in many cases, of course, First Amendment protected activity that I will defend their right to do it, even as I utterly loathe the pro-terrorist talking points they had to share, but that's their right. Anything is possible, but what I am seeing right now is a left that is more de-energized than at any time. I mean, I can't recall what things were like in the 90s. Maybe they were also de-energized then, but as de-energized as they've ever been, certainly in my adult life, or certainly since my political awareness took hold in high school or whenever.
Yeah, that's my experience too. They just seem exhausted and confused and don't really know what to do with themselves. You said there that lots of younger people are moving to the right, and I think that's very true. And we're seeing a similar development in the UK and even more clearly in other parts of Europe. I wonder how you think that might play out, because you pointed at this really interesting phenomenon in one of your recent pieces where you talked about the revolt against political correctness. So it feels like amongst younger constituencies, there is a sense of exhaustion at having been put in a straitjacket for so long, a moral straitjacket where their speech has been policed and their tone has been policed, and even their clothing and their cultural choices have been policed by this kind of self-styled, the moral crusaders of political correctness. And people are breaking out of that straitjacket. They're moving to the right. They're being a bit more daring. They're being a bit more colourful. I read a piece recently here in the British press about the return of the word retard. People are using words that you would never have used a few years ago. And there's recent discussion about the cruel kids as opposed to the cool kids. Apparently, young dynamic people are now moving to the supposedly cruel right rather than to the woke left. How do you think that will play out? Is there a possibility that there might be an overcorrection for political correctness and people become, politically incorrect, but in a way that is not very pleasant, and that could have a negative impact on public discussion as well, I guess?
Yeah, I do worry about that a little bit. I wrote something to that effect last week. I'm not going to throw in with anyone who's reveling in being specifically cruel to another person, or you say that the R insult, wielding that at another person in a mean way is never something I'm going to say that's okay. Now, I don't think you should go to jail for it, or we'll talk about if the consequences have been out of whack. But what I was complaining about when I talk about political correctness run amok, there are so many cases of people using offensive language like that, but not in a way where it was directed at someone else, where it's just flipped out in conversation, which, you could say that's bad. You can learn from that. Part of the process of becoming an adult is learning to follow social cues. But people whose lives were destroyed because it leaked that they said something to that effect in a private text message, again, not directed at anyone, just the colorful language. None of us could have passed this test when we were kids. The kids are imperfect. And it was the cruelty is on the part of the social norms enforcers in major media companies who wanted to destroy the lives of 13-year-olds who said something wrong. Now we might be getting a little bit of an overcorrection where people are like, oh, now it's good to say those things. I mean, it can be funny to say things like that in certain contexts. Like South Park is hilarious, right? When it makes fun of people in colorful language, but it like has a point and a view that makes sense. So it can be done. It should just not be casual cruelty directed at specific people. Is not something that I'm going to embrace, and I hope that doesn't become what we're dealing with. But it is just an indictment of the time we lived through from about I don't know 2014 to 2022-ish, where every major company wanted to associate itself with trying to please inherently unreasonable, social, progressive, scoldy, woke people, whatever you want to call them, who are a tiny fraction of the population. And this is going to what I was saying about Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and the tech titans earlier. The lesson is the same, and everyone gets it now. You cannot make these people, the woke scold people, happy. They are pathologically unhappy. That's sad for them, but there's no limiting principle. They'll never say, okay, that's the level of censorship we wanted, thank you. They would always be wanting more. And the companies realize that first. And when they say, all right, well, we can't appease these people. And it's having a trickle back effect where even I think the campuses have realized it to some degree. And that is going to be a very important lesson that I'm hoping is going to center norms of free expression in our society much more permanently for this foreseeable future.
Yeah, that is such an important point about, where was the real cruelty over the past few years? And it's so easy for these kind of liberal publications to refer to young right-wingers as the cruel kids. But, it wasn't those kids who were trying to cancel someone for, I don't know, dressing up like Caitlyn Jenner on Halloween or using the wrong word on campus or whatever else. We should never forget how thoroughly people's lives were turned upside down because they had the wrong thought or said the wrong thing. And that really was an era of cruelty that long preceded the second Trump administration. Okay, Robby, my final question for you is about what might come next, I guess. You can look into your crystal ball and give us some thoughts, because I think you've given us an excellent summary of the ascendant new administration and some of the good things it's doing and other things that it's doing as well. At the same time, the Democrats seem exhausted and knackered, as I guess symbolized in the figure of Joe Biden, whose decline over the past year was, for a period of time, it was the thing you weren't allowed to talk about, but it was so clear to everyone that he was declining. And his physical mental decline, to me, seems to sum up the broader moral decline of the 21st century left. How do you think politics will play out? And also, isn't it the case that it would be a good thing if there was a healthier opposition in American politics and world politics? Because, that's always good to keep governments on their toes and keep them in check and make sure that they don't go in problematic directions.
Yes, the Democrats are in a really bad spot right now, a historically very, very weak spot. But our system has thermostatic public opinion, and you're not down and out for long. The Democrats will at some point rebound. Right now, their problem is that they have no leader. And because of the way Joe Biden exited, where he got switched for Kamala Harris at the last moment, the Democrats actually robbed themselves of the opportunity to have a new leadership election. That's basically what they did in the way that it happened, whereas Biden clung to power until almost the last minute and then handed it off to someone else. Kamala is then in some ways the natural leader, but she lacks popular legitimacy because she didn't win a primary system against anyone else. In fact, the only time she tried to do, she failed spectacularly. So right now, Democrats don't have a leader, and also they don't really know why they lost necessarily. It's not like everyone is saying we need to be more left. Like, I would disagree with that, but it could be that they thought that was the strategy. We need to really lean left. Some people are saying we need to lean left. Some are saying, no, we need to be more centrist. We need to do this or that. They haven't figured out what their message is. And so Republicans are going to have a very free hand for a while. But the 2026 midterms, that'll come up. And if Democrats rebound then, I think it will be important to see how long the Elon Musk, Donald Trump partnership lasts. Of course, there have been people in Trump's orbit previously who eventually he has tensions with and ejects them. I think it has been remarkable the level of discipline Trump is exercising this time around. He seems not a different person entirely, but he is given Elon a lot of power to enact his vision. And if that continues, it'll be remarkable, but it could continue. I expect the Democrats to rebound in the fullness of time, and that, like you said, that will be healthy for America, because I want a Democratic Party that can compete, that can point out excesses on the other side when and where they occur. I'm very worried about China overall. I want the U.S. to remain economically competitive with China, and it remains a matter of concern that Elon has some business ties with China that could be concerning. So the Democrats should be able to make these points and keep MAGA or Doge in check in places that I think would be appropriate. They're just not set up to do that anytime in the next several weeks or months. But something will happen. They will finally have to have an election where a leader that actually has popular support among Democrats, instead of being picked by, George Clooney and Nancy Pelosi in a smoke-filled room, will actually rise, and then there will be competition again.
Robby, thank you very much.
My pleasure.